They're often sold as easier, more affordable ways of getting a foot on the housing ladder. But shared ownership schemes can contain legal pitfalls, leaving some buyers with major financial headaches. Afua Adom, a former shared ownership resident herself, has the story.
Many of us are desperate to buy a place of our own in London, but simply can't afford to. Cue the shared ownership home. They are being built everywhere and are marketed as an easy, cheap, surefire way to leap onto the property ladder, and tens of thousands of us have been persuaded.
Shared ownership is a way for people to get on the property ladder. They buy a percentage, and it's normally for the people that are slightly lower incomes to start with, and as their incomes increase, they can buy a larger share. It's normally the investor or the developer or the housing association that owns the building, and they manage the whole building, so there will be service charges to pay.
10 years ago, when I bought my first home, shared ownership seemed like a dream come true. At first, the mortgage and the expenses were manageable, and I absolutely loved living in a new build flat in Shoreditch. However, it soon seemed like I might have made the biggest financial mistake of my life.
Dream of owning your own home? The government's Help to Buy shared ownership scheme could open the door.
This government advert implies that shared ownership buyers will own a portion of their home. A similar suggestion is made on their website. I thought I bought and owned 25% of my Shoreditch flat, that I was the leaseholder. Turned out that legally I owned absolutely nothing.
It's not a long lease in the way that we usually understand those. It's actually an assured tenancy, 99-year assured tenancy. But what that means is that if you are, for instance, if you're 2 months in rent arrears, the landlord can get a possession order to evict you from the property, mandatory possession order, so there's no chance to argue with it, and you don't get your money back. There is a number of cases where it has happened, and people have in effect lost everything.
Yes, you heard him correctly. Shared ownership residents don't have the same legal protections as private buyers. So, in effect, shared ownership is nothing more than a tenancy, with an expensive down payment for an option to buy the whole property at a later date. The key selling point of shared ownership is affordability, but for some the scheme is proving to be anything but.
I would never have bought an apartment if I had known it was going to go from this price to this price. Why would I do that? I would just carry on renting.
I'm speaking to Carolyn on Skype, as she now lives in Israel. But in 2008 she was planning on London being home for the rest of her life after she applied for a shared ownership flat in Colindale.
The flat was absolutely amazing, and with a massive great garden in the middle, for my grandkids to play and for, to sit with the neighbours, and a nice balcony. It was amazing.
The one-bed property was priced at £235,000 on the open market. But under shared ownership, Carolyn purchased 25%, making her mortgage just over £68,000.
So I got together as much work as I could, and I took on an extra little job, and I just made it, and I would have to pay rent on the other 75%. And I would also have to pay the service charges. The total of the 3 parts was about £890, which was doable in London for a one-bedroom apartment.
But shortly after Carolyn sealed the deal, the banking crash happened, and she claims the charges eventually rocketed to £1,500 a month.
It became overwhelming, and I lost everything, basically. I lost all my savings. I think I had a week to get out.
At the age of 60, Carolyn was homeless. She staged a protest outside the offices of Notting Hill Genesis. She claimed she only bought into the property after the Housing Association told her she could afford the shared ownership.
Shared ownership does not work. I bought shared ownership 10 years ago. Today, I'm living here in this tent opposite Genesis Housing Association. I've been evicted.
Genesis told us that all shared ownership residents are financially assessed on application and will have met the criteria when they purchase their home. In a statement, they also told us,
Carolyn fell into significant arrears with her charges, and her bank eventually decided to pursue an eviction. Our leases make clear that rents can rise and what level they will increase by. and also that service charges are subject to variation.
The vast majority of the UK's 200,000 shared ownership tenants don't face eviction, but like me, less than 5% ever achieve full ownership of their homes. Ballooning house prices mean that families struggle to staircase and remain trapped at the entry level of their shared ownership property for years, sometimes permanently.
If you want to staircase up to 100%, you have to pay fees at each stage to go to the housing association. And you have to pay the additional percentage at the full market rate at that time. So if the property value has gone up, it's going to cost you that much more.
Some of those trying to climb the shared ownership ladder say they're being treated like second-class citizens.
You have to pay service charge, but you don't get anything in return.
Alison Bancroft chairs the Residents Association of her block in Hornsey, North London. A decade ago, they began to notice that despite paying service charges to Metropolitan Housing Trust, the building was falling into disrepair.
The cyclical works hadn't been done, the front door to the building hadn't worked for a decade, the glass in the fire doors was faulty, there was damp coming up from the basement in the communal areas. We continuously asked our landlords to fix the problems. After 8 or 9 years, it became apparent that they weren't going to fix anything. So we ended up issuing legal proceedings, and the whole thing ended up costing the residents of this building £15,000 of our own money just to get the service that we'd already paid for through our service charge.
Alison and her shared ownership neighbours say the private blocks in this complex did not have the same problems. In a statement, Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing said,
"The repairs and maintenance work at the block was not carried out as a result of the residents issuing court proceedings. The work was underway before they were issued to us, and the case did not reach trial."
I've been doing a bit of research, and it seems some housing associations across London are struggling to properly manage their shared ownership estates. 5 days later, and our property is still experiencing a communal leak. Social media is swamped with these kind of complaints. One of the biggest gripes is that shared ownership households are forced to pay for amenities they are forbidden to use. Just found out we're not allowed to use the car park. It feels like we're being treated as lesser beings. When I moved into my former place, I discovered that the on-site cinema, gym and roof garden were strictly for the use of private residents. Even though we were paying the same rates of service charge, people like me and shared ownership homes were banned. There was a real sense of them and us when I lived here, and that even extended to how we entered and left the building. Private residents are greeted by a 24-hour concierge at the front or had the use of a designer foyer at the side. Shared ownership households were expected to use a door hidden away at the back. In a statement, Peabody, who have taken over this block from Family Mosaic, told us,
"Residents were aware that they would not have access to the gym and cinema, and tribunals brought by Family Mosaic on behalf of residents found no evidence that shared owners were contributing towards the gym, cinema or roof garden."
There have been issues recently about what people have taken to be sort of segregation of shared ownership properties, and that sort of segregation simply doesn't make sense. I think there is some way in which it's a way of trying to reassure the private purchasers that they are not cheek by jowl with affordable purchasers.
Recently, the government announced plans to expand the availability of shared ownership homes. Yet the new initiatives don't fix the legal loopholes, which leave residents open to the increased possibility of eviction and unfair service charges. So I put these concerns to the Ministry of Housing. They told me that all grant-funded homes should be held as leasehold. They also said,
"We will be bringing forward final proposals to ensure that those using the scheme cannot be stung by unfair fees. We are absolutely clear that the segregation of social residents in shared ownership is completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated."
There's no doubt that shared ownership has been a great option for many families, but like me, rising numbers are unhappy. Unless the government address the problems, the dream of shared ownership could become an expensive financial mistake for many more Londoners.